What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my YouTube channel, The World Wide Web of Lending. I got a pretty cool episode for you today as a part of the 10-part mini-series we have called The Harmony Between the Lender-Agent Relationship and How the Consumer Could Benefit. Today's episode is called Effective Communication and How It Can Make the Transaction Smoother. When you have a lender and agent that work really well together, like my girl Leah and I do, it really makes a difference. We're going to tell a couple stories about sometimes it doesn't go that well, and then a couple of cool things that can happen, and I hope you get something out of it today. So I'm your host, Joe Webb, and I really appreciate you taking your time to hang out. Let's do this.
I am so glad you're here, Leah. Thank you for coming to my humble abode and recording this awesome session. When we chatted and you picked this topic, I was pretty excited because I think everything we're doing on my series is important, but this one is communication. It's super important. But before we get all nitty gritty, I would like my worldwide Web of Lending viewership to learn more about you. So what would you like to tell our audience today about yourself?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm really excited to be here and chat with everybody on your YouTube channel. So hi, everybody. So my name is Leah Dabrowski. I've been a realtor for close to 2 years now. And I am with Keller Williams Gateway and the Andrew Johns Home Team. And my favorite part about being in real estate is helping people out in one of the biggest and most expensive decisions of their lives.
That's all.
That's it. Just something simple. Keep it easy.
So Keller Williams is kind of a household name for people that are in the space to understand realtors and know the market. But what does the word gateway mean to the folks that are listening after you say Keller Williams Gateway? What does that mean to anybody?
Okay, so it means that we're still under the umbrella of Keller Williams. Keller Williams is an international company. And then in each space, there are people who run the different franchises. Awesome. Gateway denotes what part of Keller Williams we are and kind of who our owner is and that kind of thing. So Keller Williams Gateway has 3 offices here now in Baltimore. We have a White Marsh one, Bel Air, and then this year we just recently picked up Canton down in Baltimore City. Fantastic, gorgeous office. And so we're really excited to be growing.
For you fellow Baltimoreans, it is the Natty Bow building. So you guys had that premiere event on top looking down. I mean, I've lived here my entire life, been different things, Pratt Street overlooking Camden Yards and stuff. That view is single-handedly the most beautiful view I've ever seen.
It's really incredible how much of Baltimore and how much of the harbor you can see.
Yeah.
And it's not even that high up.
It's not even that close to like the harbor when you look at like the city, acreage or whatever, but the view, I mean, we could see people playing soccer like a mile and a half away. It was wild.
It's incredible.
That's
it's
so
really,
pretty.
Really special place.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you get a chance to work there sometimes when you're like running around with a client?
Yep. So that's kind of the great thing about us having 3 different locations is I can work out of any of those 3 locations.
That's great.
Yep,
that's great.
Absolutely. And Keller Williams, great company. If there was a place that Gateway didn't have an office, I would feel completely comfortable calling somebody in another office and being like, look, I'm out your way. Can I just come in and print a couple things? Never had an issue. Everybody's fantastic.
You seem very well matched, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
So our topic today is about communication. And there is so much we can do, but we're going to try to condense it into a reasonable amount of time. But before we get there, we want to talk about, for some people, what the white elephant in the room has been since the summertime. It's 2024 and something happened. 8/14/24. Tell me about it.
8/14/2024 had a lot of realtors running around, freaking out, wondering what was next. I probably went to as many classes in those 2 months as I had been in the 6 months prior. So the NAR rules took effect. In Maryland, we've had buyer's agency compensation for a really, really, really long time. So there was a little bit of confusion because we were ahead of the lawsuit and we were basically doing all of the things that they told us we needed to do. So some forms have changed, some language has changed, but in our day-to-day experience, not much has really changed for us. The sky did not fall down on August 14th.
Chicken Little.
Right. It was amazing. Like nobody was out there holding it up. Real estate, we're still buying, we're still selling. People are moving. People are having a great time. And
it reminds me of Y2K. Like everybody legitimately couldn't say for sure that January 1st was not going to be dramatic. And most people did not like freak out. But there were a lot of people that were like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Like, oh, January 1st, 2000, right? And at some point the computers were going to reset because the lower right hand corner of Microsoft Windows didn't have a digit for 2000. Like, heaven forbid. And it was like, and the NAR was coming. It's like August and August this and August that, and oh my gosh, and all this lawyers and agents, and so I can't buy a house anymore, And it's like, I didn't really know from my end like what actually was going to change. But the more I looked at it, I'm like, we just got lucky being in Maryland, because most of the change that other states experienced, we had already kind of had in our flow.
Exactly. And really the biggest change with the NRA lawsuit was, funny enough, boiled down to communication.
Today's topic.
Exactly.
Nice.
So it's all about the consumer knowing what they're entitled to, knowing what choices they're allowed to make.
Yeah.
And going from that. So the better and more transparent things are, the better it really is for the consumer.
So we're recording this in January of 25. Have you had any major conversations other than just tiny little differences since August 14th that you can look back and say, I wouldn't have had that conversation prior to that moment?
I've had conversations that have been specifically about people not understanding exactly what the NAR lawsuit was, and kind of having to explain to them how compensation works. I think that having that so public, it did encourage people to ask questions that they may not have thought to ask.
Which is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will take all the time to explain something to you. I absolutely love when people come to me with questions, because that shows me that you're invested and that
It's a big deal.
You want this as badly as I want this for you.
Yeah.
I can't want your house for you more than you do.
I love the way you put that. Yeah, so we're going to move on, but I wanted to start with that just because, for the obvious, for communication. And I know that you had questions coming, right?
Mhm.
And everybody in our business, even on my side, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, we'll have that conversation, because this is different. Not better or worse, but some different conversations were going to come up. And if we're going to honestly have a conversation about communication, it kind of had to start with the big elephant in the room. So
Absolutely.
for those of you that are interested in learning more about that, I'm going to give Leah's information at the end of the segment. Again, plus it'll be in the description of the video. So if you guys like her vibe and you have some questions that you think she's capable of answering, she would obviously love to take those calls, and we would appreciate them coming.
Absolutely. Awesome. I was a teacher in my previous lifetime. Love teaching everybody anything that I can to make their lives better.
And she has teacher handwriting, which I do not have. Awesome. Okay, so I don't know if you had a similar experience from the agent side, but in my office, there were some weird conversations prior to August 14th. Not bad or good, they're just different. It's just different, right? So
Right.
we had conversations that were more practical, like, where do we put the extra commission, if it applies, in the loan estimate? For those of you watching, if you get pre-approved to buy a home, with us, not with everybody, shameless plug, you will be given a fully detailed loan estimate with every cost filled in somewhere, no blanks. Is a really comprehensive idea of what you're going to spend to buy that house. Well, with the changes, there is a potential situation where some of the buyer's comp will be passed through to the buyer's bottom line. We all know that, but where does it go? So we definitely had a conversation about what that was going to look like. And then open houses, which, is where you and I met.
Yeah.
And we were like, is that going to change what that looks like, the landscape? So that's kind of like we were talking about. And then we were trying to communicate to our people, to agency partners, saying like, hey, how do you want this to kind of shake down, And everybody's different. Everybody chooses to communicate different. Some of our partners are very effective at it, like yourself. Some of them aren't, and that's okay. That's not my job, but I want to make sure we communicate together as a team. Did you have any weird conversations like that in your office?
We had a lot of conversations just in general. And that's fantastic, actually. Keller Williams did a great job of prepping us. Gateway did a great job of prepping us. They had contract classes. They had conversation classes.
Wow.
They had, pre and post classes. Education didn't stop when NAR went into effect we're still having conversations as things are changing.
That's great.
Last contract I wrote, there was a new form. So the continuing education is fantastic. I definitely did have conversations with, a lot of buyers who were interested of what does this mean for me? Do I not get the compensation anymore? Like 2.5%, 3%, 4%. That makes a huge difference, especially for newer buyers who don't have equity that they're trading in to get a new home.
So I want to ask you something, and because I know you're a badass, you'll answer it. But if I'm wrong in my badass assessment of you, just put me in my place. Have you had a situation where the seller, for whatever reason, was not going to offer the traditional compensation package that the buyer may be used to?
Yes. And so one of the biggest things is previously, it would just show on the MLS what percentage the sellers were offering for
Anybody
the
can see that.
buyers. Anyone
Public,
who
right?
had access to the multiple list
Anybody in our
service.
industry could see that.
Right.
Yeah.
So anybody in the industry knew that ahead of time, and we were able to communicate that with our clients. That changed. It now is like a yes or a no, or you can even leave it blank. So it's really, really important to be calling around and finding out what the actual status is and what the sellers are looking for your clients before you show the property. If they're not offering what your clients have agreed to pay for you, your clients are responsible to pay that difference in the amount. That's what you have signed to them in the contract. It's really important to explain to them when they're signing that initial agreement, look, if you don't have that money, that's okay. We can look at the houses and we can try to negotiate for that in our negotiations and our offers. Or you can make a choice to not view houses that they're not going to offer it. But that's a conversation I need to have with my client.
Right.
I don't know what's best for their situation. They need to tell me. And I need to support them with the facts of what I can do and what our industry can do to support them.
And here's where like the big picture comes in for our episode, not just the episode today about communication. It's a kind of a duh. But the reason I wanted to do this series was partially motivated by some of the conversations I had around this. So when that conversation happens, which is fantastic for you and your buyer, I need to know the result of that conversation because I'm giving somebody a loan estimate that basically says, here's your plus or minus on what you're going to be paying at the end of the process. And while I don't have a legal responsibility to include buyer agency comp, it's just disingenuous if it was $2,000 to be like at the end, oh, that's the comp. And when they're planning on 80,000 the whole time and then it's 82, that sucks. More importantly, if they're planning on 5 or 6,000 and now it's 7,000 or 8,000, there is a potential to break that deal. Yes. So the communication goes to us as well for you to say, hey, Joe, heads up, this house we just saw, I know you gave a loan estimate or you're going to give a loan estimate. This is what we kind of talked about with this special house. And it's so easy for me to include that. You would be copied on the email, and then everybody would know up front what the expectation is. If this house makes the buyer's eyes sparkle and they want to make an offer, they know already. And there's no fear there. And I always say in like my travels that the birthplace of fear is ignorance. Ignorance defined as a lack of knowledge. So if a buyer doesn't know that this particular house, because maybe the agent's nervous to bring it up, is going to have a different set of figures, as beautiful as it might be, than the other one they went to, they place an offer, get it in. If no one has brought it up, it's so unfair to the consumer to find out the day before settlement, or in our case, 3 days before. So I just encourage those conversations, and I hope that everybody takes a lesson from that, that if your agent is not bringing it up, don't be afraid to ask, because I'm sure they won't mind talking about it. But you got to have that conversation.
Yeah, make sure that as the consumer and as the client, you understand everything that's going on.
What a novel concept.
And if you don't, it's okay. We don't expect you to know. This isn't your profession.
That's what you're there for.
I don't know what they do as doctors and lawyers. Like, I can't walk in and do that myself.
Right.
That's what I'm there for. So please ask us the questions. Don't be shy.
What a simple idea there. But I'm glad you mentioned that. That's great. Awesome. So I started doing something that with these changes that is not normal, but I think it's helping. And I'd love to get your feedback on it, kind of live, if you will. Okay. So you engage with a buyer, wherever it comes from, marketing, referral network, whatever, and you decide that I'm the right referral partner for that buyer. And you reach out to me. Hey, I've got Mr. and Mrs. Jones. They're great people. They're relocating from Pennsylvania to Maryland. We love relocators. We're really good at them. Leah's really good at them. Anyway, and we have that conversation on the phone. You're calling me and telling me that.
Right.
Prior to that moment, we establish what their kind of main story is, their goals, contact information, when I should contact them, kind of thing, when they go to work or whatever.
Right.
And then that would be it. I started using that opportunity then to just ask the agent, are you comfortable sharing your buyer's comp with me, just so I know as you go to make offers? Mm-hmm. I've had a predominantly positive response, but I did have some negative feedback. It wasn't anything crappy, but they were like, why do you need to know that? And then my answer was pretty easy that, when I start giving loan estimates, all you got to do is tell me that they're only giving X, Y, or Z, and then I'll know the math. And they were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It was clearly the first time somebody asked that. I don't mean to be off-putting, but I think communicating, which is why we're having this conversation today, that's that next level conversation that I want to deliver so that I know everything. So I'm a partner and advocate then for your services. What do you think about that? Do you get any gut reaction? Because I don't think I've had a chance to ask you that yet.
Right.
So pop quiz, I'm going to be asking. But what do you think about that?
So I think that's a phenomenal idea.
Okay, good.
And actually, I'm going to borrow that.
It's not trademarked.
AKA
You're
steal.
good.
And I'm going to start asking all of my lenders and letting them know where that falls so that they can be prepared.
Yeah.
It's the client's responsibility to communicate with me, and it's just as much my responsibility to communicate with you. Communication is really about protecting our clients.
Yeah.
And the more information we have, the better we can serve them. I think that's fantastic. I think that feedback that you gave to an agent who was maybe a little unsure about it was good, right? They might not want to share their personal information if they don't know why. Once you understand how it can benefit your client, of course, the client is sharing all of their personal information with you about their money, right? You're not
blood type, last
you're not
90 years
asking
of
me
job
for my checking account. You're just saying, hey, how much are you expecting on this one, so that I can make sure that your buyers are ready for it.
And so I'll share why I kind of did that. And I think everything as we develop in our careers, and you're young in your career, although they were the same age, things happen and we make mistakes and we learn from them. And I'm 43. I've been doing this since I was 18. I've made a lot of mistakes when I was younger, and I learned from them. I don't make them twice, because you get a scar and you remember the scar, right? But very recently, what happened with another agent is we didn't have that conversation, and it wasn't on purpose. I was just going about doing our business. I earned the referral. I was so honored to get a call from an agent partner. It's always an exciting thing. We start going. They start looking at houses. We write an offer, and I gave them a loan estimate, and they called back, and the buyer, only the buyer on the phone, said, "Hey, is the buyer comp included on here?" And I said, no. I said, but I would love to do that. What's the kind of numbers that you're seeing shake down? And they said, well, they're offering 1.5%. So I said, okay, great. I'll take a look at it and I'll talk to the agent. Mm-hmm. Well, them saying 1.5% doesn't give me enough information to put a number down, because I don't know what the agent has agreed with the consumer. It's none of my business technically, but now that we're having this conversation, I've got to know that, right? So I called the agent, and her first response was, I went over everything with them. They should be good. And I'm like, I think they're really good, actually, but I need to know the number. And that's when it came up. She's like, what do you mean? And I said, they told me 1.5 from the seller, but I don't know what you guys agreed to. And she said, oh, it was 2.
Okay.
So that half-point difference happened to be $1,200. Not a big deal for this buyer. Okay. But I realized in my head, I'm like, man, that could have been crazy.
It could have been. And if it was higher,
right,
it could have been even worse.
Or if that buyer was on a tight budget.
Exactly.
$1,200 is a lot of money to most people. Yeah. So I just, a little like Spidey sense went off, and like, this is something I'm going to remember and kind of bring up before. So I'm glad to hear that you're kind of down with that, because I was curious, how that would go. And the person that did kind of give me a little bit of pushback, it wasn't a negative conversation. They weren't rude or condescending. They were just surprised. They're like, why do you need to know that? They kind of laughed. And I'm like, here's why. So I'm glad you're cool with that. And I don't mind you steal it as long as I know that you mentioned my other lender does this. So I can be nameless, but channel me in that conversation. We're good.
Absolutely. And if I am working, on the other side as a seller's agent and the buyer's agent is giving me something, I definitely know, if you're not working with Joe, I need to check and see where this is. So all the money comes to the closing table.
I would love that.
Yeah. But along with that, this is just another one of those things that can trip somebody up in a transaction.
Yeah.
If you don't set everything very, very clearly.
Expectations.
If you say to me, your buyer is approved for up to $300,000, they're looking at places, okay, may or may not include buyer compensation, something I need to be aware of. HOA. If there's an HOA in that building, I need to know to let you know if it's at $300,000, do they have wiggle room to cover an HOA?
Right.
They may not. So maybe we can't look at that property.
Yeah.
And I want to know that ahead of time because I don't want them to fall in love with something and not be able to have it.
And that's the worst scenario is that there's an oopsie. And it's really nobody's fault. It's not your fault or my fault, but if that number's not theirs, right? But I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to segue into that. And there are a couple different things too. Like we live in Maryland, Anne Arundel County, there's a front door fee. It's nothing obnoxious. It's like $25, $30, but with some homes that combine with an HOA, it can take the special assessments up $100 a month. Yeah. And that is a big deal to every buyer.
And it can derail the deal.
Yeah. Or prevent them from even being qualified for that house, not to be dramatic about it, right? But again, I think it goes back to communication because if we have that conversation on the phone with the buyer or not about, hey, we're thinking about going to 2213 Thomas Street. Heads up, there's an HOA. Now, God bless me, if I've done my job, I'm going to go, Leah already caught that. Looks like it's quarterly. Here's the numbers I'm including. And then we're good. But it's just a check and balance because we're communicating. And as a team, we're going to present a more enhanced experience to the buyer if this is present, this is why we're having this conversation. So awesome segue on that one. What else? So I'm also noticing now too, we're in January, but the property taxes, if people are going on their phones, I saw your eyes light up, to Zillow or Redfin or some kind of third party, there is a pretty good chance that half a year, the tax figure they see is going to work. But the second half of the year, it's not because the new assessment is in play. And that can be a big difference. Not including if the guy or gal that owns that house has exemptions. Zillow.com might not know that they're a veteran and don't have to pay half their taxes. Right. So then this person goes, oh, I love this house. The taxes are so low. When in reality, the taxes for them are going to be twice as high because they're not a disabled veteran. So it's important to have that conversation and communicate while we're discussing everything. And I'm so glad you brought that up because, again, we're just trying to provide that experience to a homeowner and potential buyer so those bad things never happen. And I think it's one of the things you get with experience. You prevent all the bad things from happening that you can. Right.
We just want to steer around all of those roadblocks, but we want them to know why we're turning before we turn. So
and all of this,
wondering what's going on now.
I would say everything we've talked about for the last 10, 15 minutes is before you even write a contract.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You don't even have a contract in hand yet. And we'll get to that in a second about then what we got to do with you and I to help the buyer. But for heaven's sakes, all this stuff is before you get the contract, which is huge.
This is a lot of it's before you even walk into your first property.
It should be.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so like we're saying, we've got all these things before the contract, and then you find a property. You get it. You text me, Joe, they've got one. At the same time, the buyer's going, we got one, like Ghostbusters where they hit that bell.
Yep.
And then we're going to write a contract, right? So then we got to communicate at that point as well, obviously.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We really got to step it up then.
Yeah, and so I'll tell you that the what I love about working with you and the people in the Andrew John's home team as well, the other agents you work with, is that that's a real special time then to communicate because we have a lot of conversations at that moment. And a lot of times they're Friday night, Saturday night.
my phone's buzzing when I'm with one of the sports of my kids, and you're like, Joe, I need you. I'm like,
Right.
oh. So when we start talking at that point, it's a lot of back and forth, but it's important because we want to leverage that pre-approval idea with the way you're going to write the offer and make them stand out. So we've got to talk.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be available and I have to be available in order for that to happen.
What do you think is one of the things, like what's the first thing that pops in your mind when I say out loud, what's one thing a buyer can do to make their contract stand out?
Have their pre-approval.
Yeah, and what it says.
Yeah, and what it says on that pre-approval.
Are you finding a big difference in visually and then like the text on the pre-approvals? Do they all look the same, or are they really different from lender to lender? Because I wouldn't know, obviously.
Some of them can be a little different, especially if you're working more with like a hard money lender or something like that.
For an investor.
And you want to be really, really careful about what that language actually says. And double check with that lender, because they don't have to follow all of the same rules.
I'm sensing that's from experience. You just said that. Okay, yeah.
Yes. So you definitely want to double check all the language and just make sure that it's accurate in the representation of what that lender is able to fulfill and in the timeline that you need to be working in.
Yeah.
So that's pretty important. I would say working, with traditional mortgage lenders, I don't see a whole lot of difference in the pre-approval letters. It gives the price that the amount that they can afford, and that's really what the seller agent is looking for.
So here's another thing, and we didn't talk about this yet, so I'm throwing you a curveball. For the right buyer, it's got to be the right scenario. I'm running them through an automated underwriting program before you have a house. Right? So I've been adding language that says they are already approved in the electronic underwriting. I've done it twice. Just luck of the draw, we've gotten both of those offers. But I'd like to think that it hasn't hurt anything. Do you think that would make a difference if a seller and their agent saw the fact they've already been approved with electronic underwriting?
Yes, I definitely think that would make a difference.
Awesome.
On the flip side, if I were representing a seller and we had one that said, you've already gone through the second step of pre-approval, essentially, that's a lot stronger and a lot more sure of a thing than, we self-reported some numbers and our lender told we can afford those.
So again, for the audience, what we're talking about is the state contract when you make an offer to buy a home is generally consistent from offer to offer. Let's just say, how many pages is the general contract? 15, 20?
Around 10, 12, 15.
Okay. So the 12 pages are most of that language is going to be the same for every house you submit an offer on. Clearly the numbers are going to change, but this is where we can communicate with the consumer about what they want and then how to present this material as an offer. And I think it makes a difference. There are contracts that are getting accepted that I can see with certain language. And then one that Otis asked me about the other day too is just you saying to me, hey, Joe, we've got a strong buyer. They really love this house. This is the one. Can you call the listing agent and let them know how strong the buyer is? If you're not comfortable with the way I'm going to act on that phone call, not like a fool, but just advocating for you and your buyer, you might not say that. You still might get the contract if you don't, right? But the fact that you're comfortable enough to ask me that, and you know that when I get on there, I'm going to advocate for us as a team, that's, again, a difference. Because if both offers are very similar, and this happens all the time, I list a house for $300 and you get two offers for $300. How do you differentiate the two offers? An agent says to me, hey, you know what? Can you call and just give an extra pep in the step? And then I have a conversation about this buyer. We don't stretch the truth. I just tell them, hey, this is a really good buyer. If our buyer's really strapped and it's a tight budget and they're first-time home buyers and we can't go over this number, I'm not going to say that, and you have to trust me to add that. So that's kind of cool, and we didn't talk about that either, but I'm throwing her a lot of curveballs. She's killing it today. But I would imagine that's another thing that you would appreciate, too, as a listing agent, is to just know extra information. You know why I'm calling. I'm not going to say my buyer is horrible, but it's important to know something to differentiate the two. Does that make a difference to you as a listing agent?
100% that makes a difference. And
Yeah.
I've actually had that from another lender who has reached out to me. One was via email, but it was still very much appreciated. He said, "Hey, listen, my client put an offer in on this house. I just want to let you know that they are good to go. Call me if you have any questions. I can walk you through it."
Yeah.
I did wind up calling them because it wound up being a very competitive situation where we had to choose between the
It's like
two.
we said.
And it's not just about what's written on the paper, 300 and 300 are the same. It's, are we going to get to closing and you get that 300?
Yeah.
And that's where these conversations
Lo and behold.
really matter.
And then as a buyer's agent and a lender presenting a unified front to give to that listing agent, who in turn is going to present it to their seller, the more communication, the better.
Yeah, it sets everybody at ease that things are going to move along in the right timeline and that they're making a good choice.
So we did all this. You said, Joe, call them. I did. We got a warm fuzzy. And your buyer gets the contract. What's the very next thing? I know you know this. What's the very next thing we have to communicate about at that point, which is really effective?
Well, we're going to do our happy dance.
Oh, total happy dance.
Got to do that first. And then our next thing that we're going to talk about is our inspections.
We're not demonstrating the happy dance right now, are we?
Okay.
Another footage. Keep watching. There'll be another video for that.
Stay tuned till the end.
Stay tuned.
All right. So, inspections. This is a huge part of real estate. And first-time home buyers, this is where they get really scared and really freaked out.
Because they don't know.
And I know that when I bought my very first house, I was 26 years old, and I cried so many times during the inspection period. And I don't want that for my clients.
Yeah.
I want them to feel comfortable, secure, and happy, right? And if the inspection comes back great, awesome. We'll move forward.
Right.
If the inspection comes back terrible, then maybe this house wasn't actually the perfect house.
Yeah.
Or maybe it is and we can negotiate. Most of the time it comes back somewhere in the middle, and that's when I really get to shine and negotiate with the other agents and figure out what we got to do next.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would bring up too is I want to know how that goes, although the lender does not have a particular role in the inspection process, because I want to order that appraisal because it's going to take a long time. And for those of you who are watching, the inspection is a structural and mechanical assessment. An appraiser is checking the current condition of the home with the market value, specifically to protect the buyer from writing a financial offer on a property that may or may not be worth that price tag. That is the point of the appraisal. But that's a big, long process. It takes time. It is not free. So we want to hold off until I know about the inspection. And then sometimes you call me and say it's done and we've got to do other certain things too.
Exactly, yeah. But, the initial inspection can trigger other inspections. What they find might give you doubt about, they found something that could potentially be hazardous to your health. You might need to get an environmental company in there to do some samples of something.
Yeah.
Or there wasn't water pressure and it's well inspected.
Yeah. Water pressure, bacteria in the water.
Exactly. So these are things that we, don't always do up front. It's not our first inspection because we just want to make sure that everything is going to be good. And then we'll do the secondary inspections after that. But you have to know about all of those. And it's really important that you know what the outcome is, too.
Yeah.
Because if it's going to cost our buyer $30,000 to fix that septic,
I need to know about it.
They have to have that money somewhere.
Yeah. And
So
maybe the
it's
seller
really
paid for it. Maybe they won't. Like you said,
Right.
somewhere in the middle usually is the way it shakes down.
Right.
And again, not to beat a dead horse, this is why we're talking, the communication there is going to enhance the experience. Whether the result of us chatting with the third party, the buyer, is to walk away or to stay and put our foot down and say, we want this house, let's make a deal.
Yeah.
It's really contingent on us communicating.
And yeah, so the purpose of our communication is to provide our client with as much valuable and pertinent information so they can make the best decision, not for us, but for them.
You should write that down and put it into a pamphlet because that sounded amazing.
Okay.
All right, guys, we've learned so much today, and I hope you've gotten just a tiny glimpse of how amazing that my guest is today and some really great questions. Focused a lot on NAR and the communication that you have to have as a team and how you as a consumer can benefit from it. But I really want to appreciate the time you've given us today. Hope you check out some other videos. And I will put Leah's information in the end with the description, her email 100%. I'll find out if you want to put your cell phone number on there, a website. And if you kind of like Leah's vibe and have some great questions for her, please reach out. Obviously, obligatory statement. If you like what you hear, hit the like button. If you've got questions for both of us, I'd love to hear about them. Hit a comment section. And if there's anything you found value or you just like hearing me ask this wonderful person questions, hit the subscribe button. So I'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for joining us on this 5th episode of the harmony of the lender-agent relationship and how the consumer benefits. We're talking about effective communication to make a process very smooth. I hope to see you guys back next time, and thanks for watching.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.
Hello, this is Leah. Hi, how are you? Okay. Great. All right, well, thank you so much for letting me know. I'm going to give our client a call and let them know, and we will definitely be in touch with you very, very soon. Joe,
Yeah.
do you know what just happened?
Did you just get a call from that seller?
It's for the Smiths. They got the house!
They got the house. So happy dance.
Yes, happy dance! Let's
What do you got there? Oh.
Yeah,